You are listening to the Critical Mass Radio Show, Orange County's business talk show, focused on exploring topics of interest to CEOs who are leading middle market companies. With your host, Richard Franzi.
Hello and welcome to Orange County's longest running business talk show. And I am your host, Rick Franzi. And I promise you, we have a great show planned for you today. Why, you ask? Because Jon Stark, CEO of Peratech, is our guest. Jon, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on your show.
I'm excited to have you here. So let's get right into it. You've been with Peratech for 7 years. Let's start by talking about the original motivation you had to join the firm.
Well, so about 8 years ago, so a year before I joined, I was leading strategy and new technology for MFLEX, which is an electronics company based in Irvine. And we came across this UK-based Peratech while looking for functional materials companies that we could partner with to make user interfaces most kind of both thinner and fundamentally easier to use. MFLEX was really good at producing stuff. Peratech had sort of a unique capability. So at that time, MFLEX was going through some changes. And in one of my regular meetings with the CEO, he had said, he thought I would be good at running a startup, be a good startup CEO. And at the time, I took that as a compliment, but kind of dismissed it. And then a little bit later, a couple of months later, our talks between MFLEX and Peratech really went quiet. And what happened was Peratech was going into administration, which is the UK term for filing for bankruptcy. Mm-hmm. So the existing Peratech board really liked the business model that we were proposing through MFLEX, and they were looking for ways to recapitalize the company. And so I was talking with the administrators, and ultimately they were not able to kind of pull together the funding, but they did pass on my name to the new investors, who just asked, can I just in one page summarize my thoughts on the value of the technology, propose a business model, and maybe a business strategy for execution. He liked it. I then, a couple months later, was in UK and met with that lead investor for Fish and Chips in London, and just to discuss the main points of the strategy, and had a really frank conversation about what it would take to make Peratech succeed. And within about 45 minutes, he asked me to be CEO. So it was interesting that within a few months of that initial comment, I joined Peratech as the CEO, with the main motivation being that I knew what it took to exploit Peratech's core technologies and solve some of the fundamental problems to kind of achieve the results that we wanted, as opposed to the goal of being a CEO.
So when you were asked to put together your thoughts about business plan, marketing strategy, did you have any insight that maybe it was a early step in a job interview, or did you just do it as a courtesy to the company?
Well, I thought that we would be able to kind of, a little bit of both, right? So Part of being a leader is, I think that you're responsible for sharing information, and you never know who's going to share information back, and you never know who you're going to work with. And with Peratech being one of those companies that possibly we partner with, if it was just sort of a simple restructuring, they didn't have much revenue on the books anyway. I thought it would be a great idea. You always have those ideas in the back of your mind, but it wasn't anything I thought of seriously.
So what have you learned from the experience of how this transpired to get you to Peratech? Not since you've been to Peratech, but what'd you learn from that experience?
I gotta say, the past 7 years has been a continual learning experience. I'd say the only moments where I haven't been learning are the ones where I wasn't paying attention. But basically, if I could talk about kind of two specific things, I would say maybe the power of solutions mindset over role mindset. And I got the position not because I wanted to be CEO, but because I wanted to solve the company's problems. I really thought that I could make a difference, and I was excited to make the company a success. And so I think my solutions mindset going into the company transcended this notion of becoming the title of CEO and made me open to doing whatever it takes to support the team in whatever functional role that is. And that could be anything from strategist and facilitator to supporter to cheerleader to just bringing people mugs of tea and coffee and patting them on the back. And the other thing that I learned is that a company performs best when I show up as my best self to sort of inspire people and then align and engage them and equip a great learning, growing team to achieve objectives. And so what I would say is, as a company trying to commercialize new nanomaterials and really hadn't done something, that we're doing something that hasn't been done before, that one thing that we really needed to be good at was learning. And we needed to make mistakes. We needed to give people permission to make mistakes. And culturally in the UK, that's a big deal. So I would continually tell the team that we are in the mistake business. We need to be better, faster, and cheaper at making mistakes than our competition, than anybody. I wanted to be world-class mistake makers. And we grew that over time. And so through that solutions mindset and that learning mindset, we came together and I think really have done what it takes to succeed.
So let's talk a little bit about the firm then. What is it that Peratech does? What problems do they solve and how do they solve them?
So it's interesting. So again, Peratech is a UK-based company, and we have a team of really creative scientists, creative engineers, problem solvers, and planners. And we're all on a mission to really make the human machine experience fundamentally more intuitive and useful for everyone on the planet. We're really trying to democratize using technology to automate and improve people's livelihoods, both at home and at work. And so while we have a large contingent in the UK, we are 46 people spread across 8 countries. And part of that was by design, and part of it was what we had to do to survive COVID. But we're structured in this way so we can efficiently work with design, manufacturing, and supply chain functions of our customer base to really design in, mass produce, and support our integrated hardware and software-based solution. So Peratech makes a nanoparticle ink. We then pattern that onto very thin films to make pressure sensors thinner than a human hair. We then integrate that into existing electronics. We use common microcontrollers and other IC, and we create custom firmware to drive this signal that we get from our sensors. And then we create user experience software that sits in the background of the applications that sit on, say, anything from a PC to a very simple electronics, even a handheld drill, and make that user interaction fundamentally better. And obviously, when you're using a computer, that's a fundamentally different thing because you're using different applications. Or on a drill, you just want to be able to put it in your hand, be able to squeeze at variable pressure. The grip is not too big, and you don't have to work too hard. Your fingers don't get tired, and the battery doesn't die. And so these are the kinds of things that we're solving to make electronics fundamentally more accessible, usable for folks. And
Okay. I couldn't wait any longer. I had to jump in. So you joined the company after it had been operating for a while, albeit not as successfully as it is now. But was this the brain trust or idea of an engineer somewhere, or what was the origin back to the original founders of Peratech?
So the original founders of Peratech, I think they stumbled on a phenomenon in quantum tunneling back in 1996. And right around the turn of the century, he started a company and was trying to find ways to license and commercialize this nanoparticle material he had sort of stumbled upon. And So he had some ideas about how that might work, but had no idea how to implement it in electronics. And the challenge is neither do electronics companies. They're so busy, right? Each product that you get has to have so many different inventions and innovations to be relevant, to stay competitive, that they can't possibly develop all of these different ideas. They really rely on outside technology companies. It's why the market is so ripe for startups, because you need companies that are continually driving with a sole passion of creating new ideas and new value. And so he didn't really understand how to leverage what was the potential. The thing that we did was we added intelligence to the material. So the material does something that other materials can't do. That's great. But how do you turn that into something that mimics tactile sensing like human skin does, and provide that to a computer the way our nervous system does, and make it valuable to humanity the way a sense of touch and feel does? And that's what we're doing to electronics. That's the piece that he missed. That's the brainchild part that he wasn't bringing to the table.
So since you've been there 7 years as the CEO, have you had major or minor pivots to the business model, Jon?
Well, so what we're talking about here is we made a major pivot to the business model. Instead of a materials and technology licensing company, we were really creating electronics solutions that companies could buy a module and download software, or it would be preloaded into their device, and that's off and running. So they didn't have to come up with all those little bits in the supply chain to do that. And of course, what I learned at MFLEX was, while we could see a lot of technology working, we needed to make sure that the electronics companies, the OEMs of the world, the Apples, the Samsungs, the Lenovos, the Nokias, were able to ingest that technology into their product at the pace of their product development lifecycle. So, and then the last bit was the pivot was, in the business model, was creating revolutionary user experiences by adding the software and firmware component to it.
So you talk about
a
lot of different applications, technology, consumer products. Where are you finding globally that Peratech solutions are getting the most acceptance and adoption?
So where we're finding is, first and foremost, in gaming. Gaming now is something where you're doing literally real-time programming. If you're pressing one key 15 times a second versus 7 times a second, you're telling a computer a different set of instructions, or you're pressing key combinations. It's not like you press on something harder, you move faster. You twist something harder, you turn faster. So these are sort of the more tactile, intuitive things that we do as human beings. And we're bringing that tactility and simplicity back to functional things that we do, because most of the functional things that we do today have this layer of electronics interface where you have to do real-time programming to get them to work, as opposed to turning a wheel on a steering wheel or pressing on a gas pedal. You can feel, I'm pressing harder, I'm pressing softer, versus pressing a button 37 times a second or 32 times a second. And so that just inherently is more intuitive. But it's moving into places like automotive, industrial controls, even into prosthetics. Because if your prosthetic hand is an electronic hand, it's an interface, and you need to have it act like a human. You need to have the human component to it, for it to be usable. to connect to, say, your nerve endings. And so while we're not doing the electronics part of that, we definitely helped with creating a sensing element that that is usable because it acts like human skin.
These are fascinating. I'm just, as you're talking, I'm trying to imagine the sales pitch too, and the customer acquisition opportunities that you face, globally, because many of the kind of names that you've mentioned, you almost have to be in, 8 different countries or whatever, because that's where the clients are, the different decision making. I imagine that's a part of why Peratech had built a global structure for your employees that isn't all housed just in London or in Southern California.
Right. Yeah. And I think the important thing with that in terms of sales is determining what not to say, because there's so much. If something can do everything, depending on how you configure it, is it too complicated? What does it need to be for each application? And to be able to have a sales proposition and a workflow that allows us to do that quickly and efficiently and remove all of that uncertainty and doubt that people have about the technology and see that through actual data, through actual experience, is really making that as fast as possible. So not only do we have to change our learning cycles, but we have to change our customers' learning cycles for us to succeed.
So I'm going to ask you a tough question. Over the time that you've been there, have you found the business model that is the scalable business that you're now adding to? Have you been able to put that into place for Peratech?
Yes, and it's interesting because it came out of COVID.
Wow.
Right, with COVID, we were building into smartphones, and it was a very hands-on experience with our customers. We were working with them hand in hand in their offices 4 and 5 days a week and co-designing in our technology. And we were about 80 to 90% there when COVID hit. And we're talking about business plans and revenue plans for by the end of 2020, and it was really exciting. And when COVID hit, the customers went silent, and the business opportunity in our forecast just evaporated. And so we realized that what we had to do was we had to be able to implement our technology from a distance, and we had to be able to make that. We had to do that more effectively and efficiently. And so we've designed tools to make the design so much faster. So we don't have to build as much prototypes. We don't need to co-design together. We're using collaboration tools and even simulation and AI to design our product. So we're taking something that used to take 10 people 3 months, 2 people 14 days.
We talked in the pre-show about the book, A Beautiful Constraint, and how sometimes companies can find when something is taken away from them, the opportunity is for a brighter future. It sounds, John, like that example was a perfect example of a beautiful constraint.
Yes. And actually, it's like we talked about, it's one of those great mindsets that when you really look at the challenges a little bit differently, where the challenges really come into place is telling scientists to do that from a fundamental perspective. But then you have the scientist that comes to you and says, if you think of all the permutations just in our sensing element alone that will affect performance, and you do all those combinations together, the number of combinations is a couple of orders of magnitude greater than there are of atoms in the universe. So when you're talking about complexity, right. I mean, that was the most complex thing I'd ever heard, right? Comparing our problems to the number of atoms in the universe. And so what we needed to do was figure out which ones we should care about and which ones we shouldn't. And how do we do that as human beings when we can only really comprehend a handful of those constraints at a time? And that's where we used AI. And then what AI did was allowed us to make very clear what are the few constraints we really needed to think about in a novel way.
Interesting.
It's really exciting. This is what happened over the past year and a half, and it's fundamentally transformed our company.
Many people have COVID-related stories. Yours is a great one because it inspired an opportunity. And I think for a lot of people, it has given them a new opportunity to think about things that they've taken for granted, like where do I go to work? I mean, some basic questions are being really thought of differently now by virtue of necessity is the mother of invention, right?
Yes, it is.
So where do you go, John, when you're not heads down, working hard, leading your organization, to get other entrepreneurs' insights and experiences that you're finding that'll help you stay ahead of your competition and then to grow Peratech?
I network globally with people kind of across industries, at events, leadership groups, both here and in the UK. I found that the venture capital is really good at creating introductions. And so I'm looking for lots of different places to find inspiration and to learn from people. And it's at all levels at companies. And I think I was saying this a little bit before, which is I find that great leaders at any level or at any industry are willing to share their insights. So to me, it's a matter of being a valuable partner in that larger organic learning collective that we're finding in business. And then the other thing is just dedicating a portion of every day to learning something. Capture that in notes and do that not only in the way of what I learned, how that information is useful, and who else might benefit from knowing it if they don't already. And so it really prepares me to have that next conversation with people.
That's a best practice there, John, not only to learn it for yourself, but to document it and share it. Thank you for giving us a nugget here on Critical Mass Business Talk Show, my friend.
It's my pleasure. And I have to give Charlie Munger some credit for that, because I really picked up a lot of that from reading his ideas about knowledge.
Fantastic. Good role model. Let's look to tomorrow, not literally, but the future. What is the future for Peratech, do you see?
Well, I think we're going to continue and scale along the path that we have. So continue to make inroads into gaming, consumer electronics, and then toward automotive and other controls. Essentially anywhere we can improve the digital interfaces that are proliferating across electronics devices. And really the end goal is to create value by democratizing the utility and value of electronics, while minimizing the footprint of electronics devices on the planet. And I think if we can do that, we have a lot of different options on where we can go as a company.
Well, we'll have to have you back at some point in the future so you can report out on how that is going. If someone would like to learn more about you, maybe connect with you on LinkedIn, or learn more about the firm Peratech, where do you suggest they go?
So please connect with us on at peratech.com, peratech.com. And then also feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I love catching up with people, sharing insights and learning. And so it's linkedin.com/Stark-Jon, STARK-JON, all one word.
Thank you for spending a little bit of time with us here today, and I've enjoyed our conversation. Thanks for being a friend of the program and a part of our community.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much for sharing your time and insights as well.
Thank you. All right. To our audience, you've been a part of Orange County's longest running business talk show. John's episode was episode number 1350. If you're a fellow Orange County entrepreneur and would like to tell your story, then let's connect on LinkedIn. I'm Rick Franzi, RICFRANZI. Coincidentally, that is my website as well, rickfranzi.com. And until the next time we have a chance to be together, I hope all of your business decisions will move your company in a positive direction.